Welcome to our very first class for Management 68, Introduction to International Business. We're going to address a series of different things through the format called a pod class as we go through. You'll be seeing several different videos in chapter 1, chapter 2, and so on as you go down. And they're going to be sent to you announcements, or you can actually see them all on Canvas as you go through. First of all, let's talk about how international businesses are different. Most of it really comes down to the sheer scope and size. You're dealing with companies that work and extend across the entire ocean, across the entire planet. Yes, you might have a small operation. Once upon a time, I worked with my family in the aspect of selling lumber from the United States into Europe over there. Yes, it was a small operation, only dealt with maybe about 10 people at its biggest point. But that being said, it really was an international operation, but that's a little bit different than most of the scope of the vast majority of your international business. Most is conducted by very large corporations. But there's so many different variables because you're dealing across cultures, you're dealing across languages, you're dealing across with personalities every once in a while. One example happened on June 16th, 2021. One company, a person who spent probably months and months in preparation to go through and set up a fabulous marketing campaign, probably was set up for a big bonus and the big promotion based upon the outcomes of this entire campaign, sat down there and they staked it upon something really interesting. If you look over here, when it comes down to a press conference being held on June 16, 2021, Cristiano Ronaldo, probably one of the world's great soccer player of today. If you look behind him, you can see all the different companies have their advertisements on there. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, yes, probably even millions to have it over there. And Coca-Cola sat there and paid for the rights to have 2 bottles of Coca-Cola sitting on the counter. When Cristiano Ronaldo sat down, he sat there and scooted those 2 bottles of Coke over, and he said some horrible words. The horrible words had a severe financial impact on Coca-Cola. Just like that, this took all of 19 seconds. He sat there, he rejected Coca-Cola and held up a bottle of water. It says agua for water. That being said, in those 19 seconds, Cristiano Ronaldo, known for kicking a soccer ball, kicked Coca-Cola around in 4 words, agua. No Coca-Cola. And boom, in that second, dropped the valuation of Coca-Cola stock by $6 billion. It wasn't only heard just on American television. You go up and take a look, you can see India had 5 different stations that covered that announcement. You can see it's down in Auckland, New Zealand. They had a newspaper over there. They had a newspaper and a video that showed it in South Africa. They had it in New Guinea. They had it across the entire planet. This man who has a following of 300 million followers on Instagram in 19 seconds sat there and says, choose healthy, because he's known for his healthy lifestyle. And just like that, boom, somebody probably lost their job. Somebody lost their promotion for sure, and probably lost the big bonus they had. They probably had a down payment on the fastest car they could possibly find in the market right then, but no longer. Just like that, all the different variables you can expect to have happen in international business, from the greatest to all of a sudden they crashed and burned. Oh my gosh, incredible. Yes, international business is a huge thing. A game changer can come out of a clear blue sky, something you planned for so long, and all of a sudden it entirely changes. It's carried across through international borders. Here you see a Starbucks in Beijing, China. You don't even think of China with coffee. China, the main drink is always tea, and has been not just for decades, but for centuries. And Starbucks really now, they claim it's the #1 coffee growth market in China overall, including the fact it just trampled over one of the domestic brands, which actually was accused of fraud in the process and had a series of different investigations. So Starbucks now is worldwide, and they're selling almost the same coffee that you can buy just down the street right over here. So we talk about different aspects of international business. We talk about a foreign business, which is the operation of the company that's outside of its home market. And we want to also change that from a foreign business into an international company. Usually an international company has operations in multiple nations. It's going to have nationals from the country as management almost always, if you call it a true international company. And also they list stock on that country's stock exchange for those that have it. And by the way, almost all of them have it now because they all want to be considered a place to sit down and have solid investments as you go through. International companies, three different things. They have operations in multiple countries. They use the nationals of that countries as part of its management. And by the way, that's really a smart move. If you sit down and took the United States the values, impressions, how you treat people, and parked it over in Japan, you'd have some serious problems because the Japanese, they have a different set of values and customs. And part of learning the whole process of international management is sitting down, adapting your corporate model into another country's corporate model and making certain you respect the values of its citizens. And that includes not only your end product, your end service, but also adapting them also into the corporation as you go through. Also listing the stock exchange as you go through. Here's a list of 11 different external forces that you, if you're going to be involved in international business, have to be attentive to. Competitiveness. You want to make certain that you're looking at your competition. Normally, you're used to looking at it down the street, but now it's down the street, it's down the block, it's around a different country, another blend as you go through. You may be in a country and think you're in good shape, and all of a sudden, somebody from a different country comes in. The world changes. Your distribution network as you go through. COVID did a series of different things. It made a lot of companies rich beyond belief. A lot of them went belly up in the process and are still fighting for survival. Years afterwards, we'll see that happening. But the distribution network was totally destroyed. You have tariffs that come in. We had a series of tariffs between the US and China, and all the Chinese did, instead of sending the goods to the United States, they sent it over to Brazil. And then the Brazilians, who had a really good trade relation with the United States, shipped it over to the US. The price went up a little bit, took a little bit longer, but really it was almost exactly the same trade, same goods, same products. It just took longer to get here and a little bit more money that we ended up paying as consumers. The economic forces, the socioeconomic, the difference between our country and another country, the financial part, the legal part, the laws are different between countries as you go through. Be careful as to what you say when you come to a different country. Their customs, mores, and laws are different as you go through. The physical part of it, one of the biggest problems of the USMCA agreement came down to the United States working with Mexico. Mexico had a much slack in their actual transportation models. So a Mexican truck coming across the border would not be considered safe in the United States. Mexico gladly agreed to start complying to our standards, and lo and behold, it upgraded their trucks, upgraded the trucks of Mexico, made them safer as they came across the border. They had different pollution laws, different ways they actually had to deal with it. They had to cope with some of that as well. The political structure, sometimes we have one over here in the United States, and other countries, often by comparison, have a different structure, and sometimes it's not as consistent as you go through. You have to deal with corruption on top of that in other countries where, hey, can I have a little bribe to get this through in the process? The social cultural as you go through, and also the different labor aspects and technological when it comes down to it. These are just 11 forces. They're probably the primary forces, but there's an entire cloud that you'll have to cope with in the international thing. It's much more complex and frankly, maybe more exciting as it comes down to it. So we look on the influence of the internal and external forces that are all around us in the environment. Those are all the forces that affect and influence the life and development of the firm. Some of them are controllable, but a lot of them, you don't have any control as to what goes on over the top. We're going to be talking about that all the way through from today, all the way to the very end of our class. You have controllable forces, but usually the things under control are the ways you deal with it inside your organization. If you're really big, you might be able to have some control outside, but for the most part, it's how you manage the inside of your corporation and respond to those things that are outside. The UK decided to leave the European Union. It took years and years to process, arguments going back and forth. But if you're a company on the inside and you have a branch in the UK and a branch in France, All of a sudden, can you talk to each other? How much can you exchange money back and forth? That's part of the company. You think it's easy enough, except for the fact that now, all of a sudden, instead of everybody using the euro, you're going back to a different dollar figure in the UK versus the euro over in Europe as you go through. Different forces will have different effects. You also sometimes don't even have control over your own domestic environment that your company's in. Or maybe they're sitting out looking at taxation from around the world, and all of a sudden, hey, you have your headquarters over in Ireland. Stop trying to cheat the United States out of that over here, or we're going to double tax you. By golly, that actually happened. Miraculously, Apple decided to close some of its doors and move its 19 employees, pretending Ireland was the world headquarters, and they decided to move back. Yes, it would have been considered tax fraud by most of us, but the laws allowed it, so therefore you can pull that off. Sometimes you'll have different people kicking up. It depends what that is. The foreign environment. There's a lot of different forces that unless you have experience in that country, you may not even know about as you go through. Different values. It can be difficult to access markets as you go through. Just being a United States farmer raising rice, try selling that rice over in Japan, where they have a strong nationalist tendency, not just by the government. And yes, they do have all kinds of barriers to keep American rice out of the Japanese market. But that being said, the people themselves, as you go through the process, they have to sit down and go through and make certain that that is their value, because they treasure their own national rights as they go through. Forces are often interrelated as they go through the process. So we look on the international environment, there's a whole series of domestic and foreign forces as you go through, but the decision making is always much more complex when it comes down to it. Sometimes a manager in the home office who thinks they're in charge, all of a sudden they're looking across an ocean and they don't know what's going on or even understand what's going on. A lot of things happen as you go through, and a lot of times we are going to sit down and make decisions based upon our own frame of reference. Sometimes you have to throttle that back down and listen to people on the other end, the ones that are dealing with the problems as you go through, and make certain that you are responding properly as you go through the whole process. A lot of times you got different choices. Transfer all your operations intact as he is and say, hey, this is how we do it. Or you back off and adapt to local conditions, or don't use that particular technique overseas as you go through. There's differences in the environmental forces, and sometimes you're better prepared as you go through the process as well. By the way, just in case you're interested, international experience can help you get a job, a higher paying job, maybe something really cool in a different country, in a different environment. But that being said, there's several things about international business that makes it different. The complexity of all things makes it really different. Those 11 different forces we talked about initially. There's controllable forces you can have inside, but there's an awful lot of uncontrollable forces on the outside. Sometimes they're interrelated and sometimes they're not. Sometimes you think they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you think this is not relevant, and by golly, it really is. Okay, so deciding the process, use your existing process, change and encompass the local process around your company in the foreign country, or don't use it at all. So how is international business different? Everything's different. Take care.